I've always considered myself a skeptic. Stories about paranormal phenomena seem to me nothing more than fascinating fairy tales for adults. But that night in an abandoned building on the outskirts of town changed my views dramatically. My name is Oliver, and I was a night guard. This building had once been a bustling office center, but after a series of accidents and strange events, it had been abandoned. My job was to make sure that no one broke into the grounds and set up residence there. What could possibly go wrong? I thought, accepting the job. How wrong I had been. The first night started out perfectly normal. I walked the perimeter, checked all the entrances and exits, made sure the building was empty. From the outside, it looked like a normal, slightly run-down building. But inside, there was a different atmosphere inside. The air was saturated with the sensation of something invisible, something that made my skin goosebumps. I positioned myself in a small office on the first floor, where there were CCTV monitors, and began my shift. The screens showed various corners of the building, empty hallways, and abandoned offices. Everything seemed calm until I heard a strange rustling behind me. The strange rustling behind me made me turn around sharply. The room I was in was empty. I figured it was just my frayed nerves, or the wind somehow getting in, despite the closed windows. Returning to the monitors, I tried to focus on the images, but the feeling of unease never left me. Not an hour later, I began to notice oddities on the surveillance screens. One of the cameras, aimed at a long, empty corridor, suddenly began to flicker, and a moment later, a figure appeared in the frame. It was the vague outline of a man who stood motionless, as if looking directly at the camera. My heart froze. I switched to another camera, and when I went back, the figure was gone. I tried to convince myself that it was just a glitch in the video surveillance system, but an inner voice screamed that something was wrong. Deciding to check the hallway personally, I grabbed a flashlight and headed deeper into the building. The cold air of the corridors seemed even denser, and every step I took echoed in the silence. When I reached the place where the figure should have appeared, I found only emptiness. On the floor, however, were scattered old papers and photographs. They seemed to have been forgotten years ago. Among them was a picture that showed the building staff, happy and smiling. On the back was a date, more than 10 years ago. I couldn't understand why, but this snapshot gave me a keen sense of sadness. Walking back to the guard room, I heard a whisper. It was barely perceptible, but clearly present. "Help, please." The words, barely audible against the dead silence of the building, made me stop. I looked around, but there was no one nearby. The whispering stopped as suddenly as it had started. That night, I found no more peace. The apparitions continued. Flickering lights, strange sounds, a sense of someone's presence. When the first rays of morning light penetrated the room, I was relieved. But that was only the beginning. I did not yet know that this night would be only the first page in my encounter with the inexplicable. After my first restless night on the job, I realized that I needed to learn more about the building I was guarding. My rational mind refused to believe in paranormal explanations, but I couldn't ignore what I was seeing and hearing. I decided to do a little investigating. At the local library, I found newspaper articles and archives about the building and the company it once housed. The building was built in the early 20th century and was originally used as a warehouse before a technology company purchased it. Articles described it as a place of innovation and progress. However, between the lines, I found references to accidents that had occurred over the years. Employees complained of strange sounds and the feeling of someone else's presence when they stayed in the building late at night. One of the articles caught my attention. It was about a young woman, an employee of the company, who had disappeared without a trace. The search was inconclusive and her case remained unsolved. Her name was Emily. I couldn't help but think that her disappearance had something to do with the weirdness going on in the building. Armed with this new information, I went back to work the next night with the intention of exploring every corner of the building more closely. Night fell, and the building was once again shrouded in darkness. This time, I didn't sit in the security room. I began my rounds in the basement, where the archives and old equipment were stored. The air in the basement was cold and damp. Racks of documents and dusty boxes created a maze. I lit the way with a flashlight and noticed that one of the doors was slightly ajar. Stepping inside, I found an old office that seemed to have been left untouched for years. There were papers scattered on the desk, and among them I found Emily's personal belongings, photos, notes, letters. Among the papers, I found her diary. Flipping through its pages, I came across entries from the last weeks before her disappearance. Emily had written about strange happenings in the building, about how she felt watched, and about her suspicions that something was going on here. Her last entry was made the day before she disappeared. She mentioned that she had found something important and was going to share the information with her supervisor. Putting the journal back down, I felt a cold breeze, even though all the windows and doors were closed. There was a rustling sound behind me. Turning around, I saw that the door through which I had entered was slowly closing by itself. That cold breeze and the self-closing door froze me in place for a moment. Images of Emily's disappearance and her last notes flashed through my mind again. Gathering my wits, I decided to continue my research despite my ever-growing sense of unease. I exited the basement office and continued my rounds. My next steps took me to an old lab on the second floor. Inside, old computers and equipment still stood, covered in a layer of dust. The flickering screen of one of the computers suddenly caught my attention. It was impossible, for the electricity in this part of the building had been cut off years ago. As I drew closer, I saw text slowly typed on the screen that read, "Help me." Shocked, I took a step back. The text continued to appear. "They are here." The screen suddenly went out, and the room was plunged into darkness. Only my flashlight illuminated the path to the door. I ran from the lab, feeling something moving behind me. When I reached the security room, I tried to calm down and analyze what had happened. My mind was spinning with questions about who or what could have created those messages and why. I decided that I had to follow through and find out the truth, no matter what. The night was in no hurry to leave, and the apparitions continued. The whispers and voices became more distinct. Now I could distinguish not only requests for help, but also warnings. "Get out of here, it's dangerous." I began to sense that I was not alone. There was definitely something else in the building, someone else trying to contact me. Deciding that I needed to take action, I took a map of the building and began marking the places where the strange events were happening. I soon noticed a pattern. They were all centered around the old conference room on the third floor. I decided that my next goal was to explore that area. As I made my way up to the third floor, the strange sensations intensified. The air seemed electrified, and every step caused an echo that seemed not to belong to me. As I reached the conference room doors, I noticed that one of them was ajar, as if someone was already inside. Cautiously entering, I found the room filled with old chairs facing the center where a dusty projector stood. Suddenly, the projector came to life and an image appeared on the wall. It was footage of an old news program talking about Emily's disappearance. The voiceover was repeating her name, and every time he did so, I felt the air around me grow colder. I realized that these phenomena weren't just coincidences. They were connected to Emily and possibly others who had disappeared without a trace in this building. My decision to explore the building turned into a mission to find out the truth and, if possible, to help those who couldn't find peace. After a night filled with whispers and warnings, I felt exhausted, but my determination to solve the building's mystery only grew stronger. The realization that I might be the key to solving Emily's disappearance, and possibly others, gave me strength. As I stood in the conference room, trying to figure out the meaning of the projection and voices, I heard the sudden loud sound of a door closing. This startled me and I ran out of the hall, but found that the hallways of the building had changed. They seemed more cramped, and some of the passageways I used to come here had disappeared, as if the building itself was changing its configuration. I tried to find my way out, but every corridor led me back to the conference room. It felt like the building was playing cat and mouse with me, cutting off all avenues of escape. I began to panic, a sense of hopelessness overwhelming me. The only thought going through my head was, I'm stuck here forever. It was at that moment that I heard someone's voice behind me, clearer than ever. It wasn't a whisper, but the clear and calm voice of a woman. "Don't be afraid," she said. I turned around, but saw no one. "You are not alone," she continued. The voice seemed familiar, and I felt strangely relieved. "Emily?" I asked aloud, but there was no response. Deciding that my fear was only helping these forces hold me back, I tried to focus and remember everything I knew about the building and its history. I began to look for new ways around it, scrutinizing every detail around me. I needed to find a clue that would help me and possibly free the souls trapped here. My attention was drawn to an inconspicuous door in the corner of the hall that I hadn't noticed before. It was closed, but when I came closer, it seemed to invite me in by opening slightly. Behind the door was a narrow staircase leading down into the darkness. As I walked down the stairs, I felt the air grow colder. At the end of the stairs was a small room lit by a faint light. In the center stood an ancient chest. As I got closer, I noticed a slab on the chest with the name Emily on it. My heart beat faster. Opening the chest, I found personal belongings, documents, and an old book inside. It seemed that these were things that belonged to Emily. Flipping through the pages of the book, I found notes that seemed to describe experiments conducted in the building related to paranormal studies. Emily was a part of this story, and perhaps it was these experiments that led to her disappearance and the strange events taking place in the building. In the room with Emily's trunk, time seemed to stop. Among the items I found were personal notes and research materials indicating that the building was not just a place of work for her, but the center of her paranormal research. I realized that Emily was deeply involved in the study of these phenomena, perhaps even more than anyone could have imagined. Gathering all the materials I had found, I returned to the security room to study them carefully. The pages filled with her neat handwriting told of a series of experiments conducted in the building to contact other dimensions. Emily believed that the building was at the crossroads of energy lines, making it an ideal place for such experiments. She also mentioned a gateway that could be opened during these experiments, but warned of the unknown risks involved. My hands shook as I realized the magnitude of what they were trying to do. These experiments may have been the cause of the strange phenomena in the building. They may have even led to the disappearance of Emily and the others. Night shrouded the building again, and I felt the air fill with electricity. The strange phenomena began with renewed vigor. Voices, whispers, even laughter, all filled the hallways. But now I knew it wasn't just ghosts or the souls of the dead. This was something more complex and mysterious. Suddenly, the CCTV monitors went out, and only one lamp in the security room was lit, under which lay the materials I had found. I felt someone or something present with me in the room. Then, I heard Emily's voice, this time clearly and distinctly. "You must close the gate." I realized that it was my mission to complete what Emily had started and try to restore the balance that had been disturbed by the experiments. I had to find that gate and close it to stop the phenomena terrorizing the building. Realizing my task, I began to prepare. After studying Emily's materials, I drew up a plan of action. I needed to return to the lab on the second floor, where I suspected the center of the energy lines and the possible location of the gate was. When I emerged from the security room, the building seemed different. Every step I took seemed important. I could feel the energy around me reacting to my presence. The path to the lab was difficult. Apparitions tried to stop me, but I kept moving forward, armed with knowledge and determination. As I approached the lab, I felt a tremendous tension in the air. The door to the lab was open, as if inviting me inside. I entered, ready to face the unknown and close the gate that was never meant to be opened. Stepping into the lab, I felt the air vibrate with latent energy. In the center of the room stood an old, shabby desk, on which lay scattered papers, and an ancient volume, apparently the very one Emily held in special trepidation. I walked over to the desk and opened the book to a page marked with a bookmark. It contained notes on the procedure for closing the gate, including a strict set of instructions and cautions. The lights in the lab began to flicker, as if reacting to my presence and intentions. I tried to focus on the text, trying to ignore external stimuli. According to Emily's notes, closing the gate required a combination of certain symbols arranged in a specific order throughout the building. These symbols acted as a key to the energy lock, holding the gate open. I grabbed a flashlight and the map of the building that Emily had drawn, which marked the locations of the symbols. The first symbol was right here in the lab, on the wall behind the desk. Carefully, I drew it on a piece of paper to memorize the exact shape and size. The next symbols were distributed throughout different parts of the building, including the basement, where I first encountered manifestations of the unexplained, and the top floor, where the conference room was located. Each step of the ordeal exposed me to new challenges. The sound of footsteps behind me when no one was there, cold touches on my shoulder, whispers right at my ear. But I kept moving forward, fortified by the mission I had to accomplish. As I found and activated each symbol, the phenomena around me became more and more intense. The air vibrated with energy, and I could feel the pressure building. When I activated the last symbol, the entire building shook like a massive earthquake. I hurried back to the lab to complete the ritual. When I returned, I found that the book on the table had opened to a new page, showing the final part of the ceremony. According to the instructions, I had to say certain words and close the circle, connecting the symbols into a single network. Gathering my will in my fist, I began to read the words aloud. When I finished, the entire room lit up with a bright light emanating from the center of the table. The light expanded to encompass the entire lab and then the entire floor. The sounds and phenomena around me suddenly stopped. Everything went quiet, and I felt a deep sense of relief. The gate was closed. I fell to my knees from exhaustion, feeling the tension leave my body. The building became quiet, as if it itself was experiencing relief after years of struggle and suffering. I felt a deep gratitude and respect for Emily, whose notes had helped me in this difficult task. She was a true explorer of the unknown, and thanks to her efforts, I was able to regain my balance. After the intense glow subsided, I was alone in the silence, trying to gather my strength and make sense of what had happened. The building, which until a few minutes ago had seemed like a living thing, full of mystery and uncertainty, was now quiet and peaceful. The phenomena that had terrorized me, and probably many others before me, had finally ceased. Rising to my feet with difficulty, I realized that my task here was complete. I now had a new goal in front of me: to find a way out of the building that seemed unwilling to let go of its uninvited guest. The path back to the guard room was strange. The corridors that had seemed confusing and changeable before were now plain and simple. All that remained from the night's adventures was a feeling of fatigue and slight shock from the experience. Reaching the guard room, I found that the door to the outside, which had previously been immovably closed, was now easily opened by my hand. Standing on the threshold, I looked around at the building, which now seemed like an old acquaintance that held deep secrets and stories. I stepped outside where the first rays of the morning sun were illuminating the city, bringing with it a new day and new hopes. Walking a few steps away from the building, I stopped and turned around, looking at it one last time. In the back of my mind, I felt gratitude for Emily and everyone else who had left their mark on this place. Their stories, though shrouded in secrets and mysteries, had now found their peace. I promised myself that I would keep their story alive and perhaps one day share it with the world. Returning to normal life after such an experience was not so easy. The nights in the building changed my perception of the world, made me believe in the unexplainable, and realize that the world is much more complex and mysterious than we can imagine. I continued to work as a security guard, but now with a new perspective that helped me see more than just the darkness of night. As time went on, I began to write down my experiences, fearing that the details might fade in my memory over time. I wanted to make sure that the story of what happened that night and those who influenced it would not be forgotten. After the tension subsided and the building fell back into silence, I was alone in the lab, gathering my strength. The task was done. The gate was closed, but I was faced with a new challenge: to find a way out of this place, which now seemed completely different. I stood up, feeling every muscle respond with painful fatigue. Taking Emily's book and the materials I'd gathered, I headed for the lab's exit. The building was silent, and this new kind of silence seemed even more unsettling than all the whispers and sounds I'd encountered before. Every step through the corridors of the building reminded me of what I was going through. I stopped at every door that had previously held symbols behind it and couldn't help but think about how much I didn't know about the world around me. Emily had opened my eyes to many things, and her research had shed light on the dark corners of this place. Upon reaching the main entrance, I found that the door that had previously seemed like an insurmountable barrier was now open. The light of the morning sun illuminated the threshold, and I felt a new wave of relief sweep through my body. I walked out of the building, breathing deeply of the fresh air. Outside, I stopped and looked around. The building that had recently seemed to me a living organism, full of mystery and riddles, now stood silent and still. I realized that my adventure in this place was over, but the lessons I had learned from the experience would stay with me forever. With Emily's materials under my arm, I promised myself to continue her work, to investigate and understand the paranormal phenomena that surround us. This night had changed me, and I felt compelled to pass this information on to the world so that others would not repeat the mistakes of the past. Walking back to my car, I looked back at the building one last time. The sun had risen high, and its rays played on the panes of the windows, making the building almost welcoming. But I knew that there was much more behind those walls than might appear at first glance. As I got in the car, I set a new goal for myself to explore and understand the mysteries that surround us every day, but go unnoticed. The story of Emily and the building was the starting point for me on this new journey. After I left the building, life around me seemed somehow different. My view of the world changed, and I began to see aspects of reality that had previously remained hidden to me. When I returned home, I delved into Emily's materials, trying to see what other mysteries she had unraveled and what else I could learn from her research. My days and nights became filled with reading Emily's old books, archives, and personal notes. I discovered that she was part of a small group of scientists and researchers dedicated to the study of the paranormal. Their goal was not only to understand the nature of these phenomena, but also to learn how to control them, which, as it turned out, involved great risks. One of Emily's notes mentioned the key to the gate, an artifact that she said could control the passage between worlds. She believed that this key was hidden somewhere in the building, and finding it could have prevented many of the disasters that occurred there. However, her records did not indicate the exact location of the key. Realizing the importance of this artifact, I decided to return to the building. My goal was to find the key to the gate and make sure it never fell into the wrong hands. Armed with a flashlight and a map on which I had marked the possible locations of the key, I re-entered the building. The night in the building was quiet, but filled with anticipation. I felt that each step was bringing me closer to a clue that could change many things. My exploratory journey led me into the bowels of the building, into a room that seemed untouched by time. Here, among the ancient furniture and forgotten documents, I found a small chest decorated with symbols similar to those used to close the gates. Opening the chest, I found an ancient artifact inside, emitting a faint light. It was the key to the gate. Holding it in my hands, I felt a powerful energy emanating from it. In that moment, I realized that Emily was right. This key was of great importance for controlling paranormal phenomena. With the artifact in hand, I returned home, where I began to explore its possibilities. I realized that a new horizon of research had opened up before me, and that the responsibility for preserving and using the key to the gate now rested with me. With the key to the gate in my hands, I felt not only the power, but also the burden of responsibility. It was clear to me that my life would never be the same again. Emily's research and my own adventures had opened my eyes to the existence of other realities beyond our comprehension. Now, in possession of the key, I became the gatekeeper between these worlds. I decided to continue Emily's work, using the artifact with care and respect for its power. My goal was to explore its capabilities and find ways to utilize it for the good of humanity, while preventing any attempts to abuse this power. Over time, I developed a small group of like-minded scientists, researchers, and paranormal experts. We worked together to decipher the secrets hidden in the artifact and explore new frontiers of our reality. Our mission was not only to explore the unknown, but also to protect the world from potential threats that could come from behind the gate. In the course of our explorations, we faced many challenges and dangers, but each new discovery brought us closer to understanding how these other dimensions affect our world and how we can interact with them without harming the fabric of our reality. My story, which began one night in an abandoned building, became a journey through the uncharted paths of human knowledge. It was a journey full of danger and discovery that changed my life and gave me a new purpose. In conclusion, I realized that the world is much more complex and amazing than we can imagine. There are mysteries waiting to be discovered and boundaries that are meant to be crossed. And while the path ahead may be full of unknowns, I am confident that the light of knowledge will always pave the way through the darkness of ignorance. Oliver's story is only the beginning. The key to the gate has opened the door to a world full of mystery and possibility, and I am ready to follow that path wherever it leads me.